We have an audience from all over the world here this morning. So I'd firstly thank you for coming. Some of you at Saturday afternoon, some of you at some Sunday morning. The topic of today's presentation is collaboration. So we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. Now, I'd firstly like to introduce Kate Kerrigan. Kate is from Oregon in the United States.
Hi, everybody. So it's Saturday afternoon here in Redmond, Oregon. So it's on the west side of the country.
Thank you, Kate. And Kate's going to be talking about her collaboration called Piecing Us Together. So Kate will be second in our order of speakers today. Now I'd like to introduce Kristen Wallace and Kate Jenkins. And these ladies are from the Barossa and are going to speak to us today about a couple of collaborative projects that they've been working on. Kate and Kristen, would you like to say hello to the audience?
Hi, I'm Kristen Wallace. And I work together with Kate Jenkins in the Barossa, which is in South Australia.
So Kate and Kristen are third in our lineup today. And then I'd like to introduce Marion Shapiro. And Marion Shapiro and I have been collaborating now for some time, and we're going to be speaking today about a couple of our projects. Marion, would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm from the Blue Mountains in Australia, which is just west of Sydney. And I'm about 20 minutes down the road from Caitlin, which makes collaboration kind of a lot easier.
Absolutely. And yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple of projects we embarked on. One was sort of modified by lockdown and adaptations. Yeah. And then our second collaboration, which is underway and is in the studio at the moment. So I'd also like to introduce Saskia Kremer. Saskia, do you want to say hi?
Oh, hello. Hi there. I'm here in a support role today, not to the extent we planned, but anyway, we'll work it out.
Saskia today is going to be moderating the questions. So I would really encourage you to ask questions. So if you would like to send questions through in the chat, either to Saskia or to everyone, and then at the end of each speaker, we'll be able to address those questions and go from there. So first up today, Marion and I are going to talk about our collaboration Australia. This project is really special to Marion and myself. And Marion's going to talk a bit initially about how it all got started. I'd also like to add, we were really fortunate to have this piece selected for Mosaic Arts International in 2020 for the Mosaic in situ part of the exhibition. So that was an absolutely fabulous acknowledgement that we received. But Marion, would you like to start with just sharing with our audience a bit about how all this got started and the process of the invitation?
Firstly, I guess if people are not aware of the Ruins project, go and look it up because it's the most fabulous thing. It's in the US. And I'd been part of it before, but in 2019, Rachel invited me to be part of a project called the Map Room, which she was just starting at the Ruins, which was basically going to be maps of as many countries as she could get as part of the Ruins installation. And I promptly invited Caitlin to join me because I didn't want the responsibility for doing, Australia all on my own because it seemed like just too big an ask. And we went from there. Originally, the site as part of the Ruins was in a wall which had existing mosaics on it. That was the original plans. You can see there were all these kind of inclusions of existing stuff. And the first idea was to put the countries kind of weaving in and out of these existing mosaics. So that's what we were kind of starting with. And it was just a really exciting project. And the initial idea was that we would make it during early 2020 and then go and install it ourselves, but more of that later.
Yeah, Rachel traced that outline and sent us that on a piece of paper. So we knew roughly where those inclusions were, and we then had to start working out ideas, like what are we going to do, firstly, we had the limitations of it. It was Australia. There were boundaries to the mosaic. So then we had some brainstorming sessions around how we were going to address it in terms of the concept, because Marion and I both work really from a concept base. And we just lived through the summer of 2019, and there was fires, and fires has been a big part of life in the Blue Mountains here. And we decided to work with a heat map as our basis, and this became the sort of starting point for the idea development and the palette and how we were going to structure it. So we looked around for a heat map, and we didn't use it as a sort of exact thing to work from. It was just more of a starting point or a springboard for our ideas that ran from there. And then we just started to investigate materials. Marion, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, we started to investigate materials. So both lucky that, we have working studios. So we did a whole kind of dig through of what was in the studio in the kind of appropriate color palettes, which went through from a kind of pale yellow to a really, really kind of deep red, purple, and, kind of everything else reddish and orangish on the way. We went fossicking, we went for bushwalks, we picked up local stone. We got mookaite, which is a uniquely Australian stone as part of it. Caitlin brought some of her fire damaged materials, which were just kind of really beautiful and meaningful, and obviously made, as we were referencing a heat map, were very significant for this particular project. I brought in basically some odds and sods that I had that people had given me, and also some bits of kind of knitted copper wire, which I'd been experimenting with. And I must say that, being part owner of a multi-business kind of really helped at this point, because I could have a really good kind of rummage through. And then once we'd got the materials, we then basically sorted them into the different kind of color areas, so that we had, yellows, reds, oranges, and so on.
Material stash was on my studio, all over the table, rocks, pizza, multi, fire salvage. Marion was also doing copper knitting at the time, when she just started doing copper knitting, and we had some little pieces of copper knitting as well that we were looking to include. So then what next? Okay, so we know we have this outline of Australia. We knew that we wanted to work together, but have some sort of separate sections in terms of how we were going to do it. So we also knew that we wanted to use mixed media. Obviously, the media we accumulated was very textural. We both love texture. So we needed to work in a way that was ungrouted. We wanted a textured surface. So we decided to work direct on mesh. So that using a cement-based adhesive. So we used Laddercrete 254 because it was an adhesive or thinset that could be acquired in the United States, which was a really important consideration, because we wanted a marry or a good relationship between thinset on the mesh and the thinset on the wall. So we decided to work direct on mesh, because we also had to section the mosaic to send over, because as Marion alluded to, we were both going there for the summer conference, which was a massive highlight coming up. We were going to go to the summer conference, and then we were going to go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to install it. So we were going to cut it up, box it up, and send it there so we could actually install it on when we arrived.
And you can see the section lines with those dotted lines. Those are our original cut lines.
Yes, actually, that's a great point. So this is where we had planned to break it up in and around these inclusions, which were already there, which had to be mosaicked on site. So we decided to put in these contour lines of heat sections, and that's how we worked out C&M, 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 who was going to do what. Anyway, then we got started.
Yeah, so we started basically apart. So I started in the middle, which is the kind of red blob up the top, and Caitlin started at the bottom of Western Australia, which is the yellow bit. We kind of did that because we wanted to both be working on it at the same time, but not kind of banging into each other. And then as we did more, we could then start working literally next to each other with the kind of contour line in between with that slightly bigger gap, so that we could actually have more of a conversation between the pieces as we worked. So it kind of got easier to work together as we did more of it. Okay, and that, that was it finished as we thought, with lots and lots of kind of nice big gaps for the inclusions, which would enable us a bit of wiggle room at the time of installation. And as you can see, that's about 2/3 of Australia. And at that point, we kind of thought we were done and ready to go. Unfortunately, that was March of 2020.
Yeah, so of course, this is when our COVID hit Australia and we all went into lockdown here. So this was all ready and was waiting, I think, in Marion's studio, ready to be sectioned. Yep. And then we firstly, you know, facing the general stress of what was happening around us, but then also realizing that our plans to travel to the States were over and that we would not be able to do it. And we had to make some changes because we could not expect Rachel to firstly install it and then finish it and match all the undermento, etc. So we had to make some changes. So Rachel had a look around her site and chose a new location where the mosaic could be installed in one full, you know, without any inclusions or without any visual interruptions. So she picked a new site. We decided to then complete the rest of it before we sectioned and sent it away. So this is just a shot of my previous house where my kids, who have all grown up since then, but homeschooling, hammock swinging and mosaicing through lockdown in Australia. But that worked quite well. And so we ploughed on and we made it. So we were getting closer and closer. We had to sort of then invent undermento to go through those sections that we had planned that were going to be original inclusions. But we, at this point, then had to physically swap the board because we weren't allowed to see each other. We could only leave our home for essential reasons. So one of the essential reasons was to transport this mosaic, which was on a board, which is about 1.5 meters wide, between our studios, all masked and gloved and dropping it on doorsteps and back again. And finally, it was finished. And then it was up to Marion then to do the next part of the process.
There it is, finished. And there's Tasmania as well, which you can't see in this particular shot, but you will see a bit later. And if you remember earlier, we had all these lovely worked out cut lines for when it originally had all the inclusions. And, you know, honestly, this is not the way you're meant to do it. But once we realized that we actually had to mosaic the whole thing, the cut lines just went out the window. I mean, we just went, oh, stuff it. We've got the contour lines. We'll just finish it and then we'll work it out afterwards. This is not a method I would necessarily recommend to anybody. It's not how you're meant to do it, but, you know, that's what we did. So once it was done, I cut it out, leaving a fairly wide margin on the mesh so that it would be stable during transport. And I reckoned that if Rachel wanted to cut it down further so it was closer, she could do that when she got it. And then I spent probably about a day very carefully cutting it into sections with a very, very sharp, thin knife, what I would call a scalpel, but I think people would also call an X-Acto knife, and then put it all back together again. And you can see it's in 5 sections, and there's Tasmania down the bottom, carefully labeled with an arrow showing which way is up. And then I always use this for complex installations, a system of what are called registration marks. So those blue tape lines which are going over the cut lines with a line marked down the tape, and then you cut across the tape. And then when you put it back together again, you join up the lines and it all fits. And what you can't see under there is I also did on brown paper, I actually drew around all the sections. So there was actually a big full-size map of Australia on brown paper with all the sections labelled so that Rachel could lay it out dry on the map before she actually put it on the wall and checked that everything kind of went together. Yeah, so after I'd done all that, I then packed the sections on very stiff cardboard, again, making sure their labels were still in place. And then I bubble wrapped the heck out of it and taped it. And I took it to basically a packing and sending place to do the rest of it for us, which was really worth it. And they made a kind of custom foam padded box. They put layers of really reinforced cardboard in between it. We also added the map, some patching materials, and a little goodie bag of Australian stuff for Rachel, just because we thought that would be a nice thing to do. And off it went. And it only took about 5 days, which was also one of the advantages of using a proper service to do it rather than Australia Post.
Yeah.
They dealt with all the customs and stuff. It was really efficient. So it got to Rachel. There we go. And we had a lovely little Zoom FaceTime thing. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning for Rachel and Deb, who were installing it. And it was about 1 o'clock in the morning for me. So I was in my PJs and in bed over FaceTime, and they were installing it. And there, I think that's Rachel's hand, but I'm not sure. You can see it going up on the wall with the registration marks working, which obviously kind of came off afterwards. And there's just a close up, and you can see it up with the kind of contour lines sort of showing in between the different sections. And yeah, and there's a long shot. I really like the way that it talks to Annabella's, which is the one next to it, with the reds kind of making that conversation. And the other thing I really like about the way that Rachel Sager does installations is she leaves this outline of cement-based adhesive or thinset round the edge, which I think gives it a sort of almost three-dimensional kind of shadow effect. And kind of outlines it. It's the kind of installation version of doing vermiculatum around the, edge of a piece. Anyway, I really like that.
And I think it works really beautifully with the sort of the mottled, muted cement as well, and with these other remaining inclusions that are left on the wall from the ruins' previous life. And our final slide is just a close-up of this. And we thought it might be really lovely to share a brief video. So this is coming from the Mosaic Arts online platform. So Mosaic Arts Online is one of the online schools that you can, enroll in enroll in online courses. And Rachel has quite a few, but what she did was she created a video tour of the ruins and has spoken about that with Tammy, who is from Mosaic Arts Online. So I'm going to share that briefly and just play just 2 minutes of that.
So Steve-O and I of the train I had this idea to start tracing countries with stain. You don't like to use paint on these walls, but stain is a really good way to create an outline that won't get in the way of mortar later. So I started coming up with all of these countries, and Steve-O has this wonderful projector that we have to use at night. It lights up at night. So we have these midnight tracing parties. And I started drawing the countries just very spontaneously, for sure. And there are several countries in play right now. We have quite a few. And I'll point out some of the ones that aren't here yet a little later, but this one I want to introduce you to Australia.
We have one more piece of Australia to go. I'm holding this because this piece on the right seems to be sliding. None of the rest of them slid, but we might have to hold this one for 10 minutes while it stays up. One of the things that I wanted to point out of how well this is working for what Marion and Caitlin did is that they put these little blue pieces of tape on their puzzle pieces. This is E section and this is C section, and that helped us line them up perfectly. Yeah, I just wanted to show you all that Deb and I have beautifully back buttered the piece, and we've also buttered the wall with thin layers all the way to the edges. We want to make sure there aren't any little pockets of air behind the mesh, right? I'm gonna sit down here. It's very hot today. All right. Just like a puzzle. Beautiful. Beautiful. This is where you massage the piece in to the wall. And we might have to hold it for a few minutes to make sure that it doesn't slide. And again, you see the tape coming together here? That makes our job so much easier. I give Marion and Caitlin so much credit for putting together not just a beautiful piece, but a very well orchestrated installation. Thank you very much.
So thank you to Rachel and Tammy for allowing us to share that. Now, Marion, thank you for joining me in conversation about Australia. And Saskia, were there any questions that have come through?
Before we start questions,
yes.
could I just say really quickly that it was a fantastic collaboration, both with Caitlin and also with Rachel, kind of long distance. And my one regret about it is that I haven't seen it in situ, and you know, who knows when we will. But
Yeah, hopefully we'll get there one day, Marion.
yeah.
Yes. Hopefully one day very soon. We have one question from Francesca O'Donnell. Francesca is asking Marion, the question is, when you had to cut out the sections, how did you work that out without previous marking as before?
Well, we kind of did have some of the previous marking in that we had the contour lines between the different sections, and those had been deliberately left wider than the, you know, interstices between the tesserae within the section. So where I could, we used the contour lines. And then when I had to cut vertically, I just, you know, did the best I could, basically, going down in between. I mean, it was hard work because you were cutting through cement-based adhesive at that point, as well as just cutting through the mesh. And it took quite a long time. But when I did it, very, very little came off. I mean, partly because of the Laticrete, which is, you know, darn good thin set. And nothing came off in transit, apparently. So there was only a tiny, tiny amount of patching needed. So yeah, I kind of worked it out as I went along, and I was just aiming to keep pieces of, you know, a reasonably equal size, so that you didn't end up with something that was long and thin and kind of fragile and might kind of split. And you could see when you saw Rachel putting it on the wall, how rigid those small panels were, because we kept it quite small. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Marion.
So much, Marion. Thank you.
And Saskia, I think another question's come in now.
From Diane.
Yes.
Yes, so we have a question from Diane Sonnenberg. And Diane would like to know, when you worked together on this, did you find that you were influenced by each other's styles? If so, did it change your andamento and so on?
Well, I'll answer that one. And I think probably yes. You can see where we started. We had these two separate areas that we're working on, and you know, Marion and I are both very experienced mosaicists. We're still both learning, but we've both been doing this for quite some time, and we've both worked in very similar ways and very different ways, and in many, many diverse ways. But when you're working sort of section by section, side by side with one another, there's a sort of fluidity that is required. I mean, I think if we were completely different, it just wouldn't have gelled. So we were inspired by each other, I suppose you could say. We're inspired by each other's approach, and we're inspired by the materials. So when you're working in a line of mosaic, you're not ever just working in that particular line. You're looking forwards, you're looking back, you're looking up, you're looking down, you're looking in 360 degrees around the tesserae that you're placing to make sure that the placement of that piece is in speaking to the pieces around it. So there's a broader observation at play all the time. And then when you're working next to somebody else, they're also observing you. So they're responding to you, you're responding to them. So in some ways, I suppose you could say there was a bit of a change. What would you say, Marion?
I'd say two things. I think that's why we started apart, but as soon as we could, we started working next to each other so that you could actually see the conversation between the pieces. And I think the other thing was that when we started, I started in the middle with that dark red bit, and I distinctly remember you saying something like, "Ooh, that's very textured." I'm not sure kind of how enthusiastic you were about that at the beginning, but it all worked out in the end. And I think there might have been some, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there might have been some pieces right at the end where, because this thing was traveling from, studio to studio and ended up in mine, where we might have done a little bit of each other's bit and had to actually channel somebody else's andamento kind of directly, and that was interesting.
And this is actually something that we'll continue talking about later in our second presentation, which will be at the end. But yes, I think it's probably helped to move us forward into our second collaboration. So we're going to close this particular section now, and I want to say thank you again to Marion, and thanks for the questions. Now we're going to now move to Kate Kerrigan. And I had the great pleasure of meeting Kate Kerrigan in Sama, at Sama in 2016. And Kate and I hit it off and had many an evening sitting around chatting about mosaics during the conference. And that was just a wonderful, wonderful time. So I've been watching Kate really closely since then, and have been really delighted to see her current project piecing us together. And she's joining us today from Oregon, the United States, to discuss that project.
So unlike just you two collaborating, I just collaborated with 542 people in person, and 85 of which are actual mosaic artists, but the rest of them are all family, friends, acquaintances from my past and present. And so I was sort of on this road trip where I went and visited each of these people in their homes, or outside in a park or wherever they felt comfortable. And everybody created their own little mosaic.
So Kate, how did this idea come to you? Were you in the shower? How did you come up with it? Where was the bolt of lightning to travel around? How did you decide where, when, who, how?
Yeah, so I got the idea May 15th of last year, walking my dog, which is where a lot of my ideas come from, or when they come. And because I've been mulling over, like, through the pandemic and the lockdown, like a lot of different ideas. So it's not like exactly it came out of nowhere, even though it did feel like it was a lightning bolt of it all just came together quick. But I've been thinking, just about, relationships and family and the importance of, in-person connections and relationships. I've been thinking about travel and how much I missed it. I just want to get my car and go. I've been thinking about my work in general, which has been shifting in a neat direction, a little bit more abstract and dealing with current and social issues. So, and I'm like, man, like, good art comes out of hard times, like how much stuff has come out of World War II, books, films, music, and we're in something right now that's so important, and it's going to have a lasting effect for all of us, of course. And so I just been mulling over, like, where's my art going? I want to do something bigger and more meaningful. So all those ideas just kind of came in this, like, travel, go visit your friends around the country, and do it. And so my mom was turning 80 July 14th back in Wisconsin, where I'm from. And so I'm like, well, if I had to back up from that date, like, I need to be there then. So I started just like, if I left, it came up with July 1st of leaving. And there weren't that many people between Oregon and Wisconsin. So, but I started plotting people. I used Facebook immensely to figure out where everybody lived. You know, I don't have their numbers or emails or know where they live. So Facebook and social media was actually incredibly helpful, like it should be, you know, connecting people, but this was in a face-to-face way. So yeah, and then I just started plotting out. I had a whole list, a database of probably over 800 names. Clearly I wasn't gonna probably see everybody, you know, just, but that was my potential. And then with room for a lot of meeting new people and, you know.
So one of the things, so you've got 540 participants and counting. So,
yeah.
you know, when I heard that, I just think, oh my goodness, like collaborative, color, design, chaos. How do you refine it so that it looks good? Because I've seen this come together in your post, and it looks so sophisticated and it looks so unified. So what strategies did you employ in order to give the project these parameters to ensure sort of visual cohesion?
Right. The only parameter, honestly, was the color choice. I based it on 4 different places that I lived: Wisconsin, San Francisco, Lake Tahoe, and then now Oregon. And that would be how I knew the person that I was going to see. So that was going to be the color that they would use. So depending on how where I met that person or how we knew each other, that was the color combination. And it actually worked out really well in spreading out all the color. Other than that, I let go. I was like, I started on this. I did not know. I mean, I was going to introduce people to mosaic, but I'm doing this with kids. This had to be fun. I'm like, okay, no rules. You can do whatever you want. And I wasn't going to teach them like Andalent, this is how I would do it. And it all needs to look this way. Because this is me visiting these people, and it is about the connection, like we want to have fun. And here's some introduction to mosaic, and just be creative, express yourself. So as different, I've got so much different material. I'm like I was kind of getting a little nervous myself. Like, how is this really going to go together? And boy, do I have some work to do. But it actually, surprisingly, so many styles that without knowing it, these people came up with things that are just flowing just so beautifully together. Whether they worked big or small, or like little kids built up, and I'm like, if it sticks, it stays. That was my role. And like, so
because your work is so perfect, your work is so controlled and so perfect. Right. And this must have been a letting go process for you when you say, there were no rules, lose control. Yeah. But in that losing control and taking the very strong hold off that you would have in your own practice of how it goes, what did you sort of learn? What did you learn about that letting go process? And
well, I think COVID in general made me realize to let go. I have very little control over a lot of things, and that was a really important lesson for me. Like, I'm always planning and controlling and such. So I had to let go then. And so I was already in the process of and just let go, let this unfold. And it was, trying to get back to the question there.
Just what did you, I suppose, learning about that?
Yeah. And I think that when we don't have expectation, we're pleasantly surprised a lot of times. And I was just like, I'm just going to go with this and see what happens. I mean, I didn't have an expectation. And so maybe I just got really lucky.
So that's something too. It's like that, the idea of preconception, preconceiving an outcome.
Yeah.
It's something we try to avoid, because we have a concept or an idea. We want to let the process unfold, and we want the process to take us somewhere. But when you're working with so many people, you really don't know where that's going to go. But I remember we caught up the other day, Kate, had a chat about this beforehand, and one of the really incredible things he was talking about was how the process of gathering with very small groups, intimate groups, for COVID safety reasons, gathering with those intimate groups in that creative space was a real catalyst to conversation.
Yeah.
And opening. So can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So yeah, I was right in the heart of COVID. Actually, I thought there was an opening, but then it came right back with Delta. So I didn't know what to expect with travel and such. So meeting with people and mask or no mask or indoors, outdoors, whatever is comfortable. But the connection, I mean, it gave me the reason to show up at their doorstep. And, you know, it's kind of like, it wasn't just I was wandering around the country traveling. So just having that purpose to show up and have something to do. I mean, because literally there are people I hadn't seen in 30, 40 years. And how awkward could that be? Or, you know, even 20 years, or I didn't know them that well, or I didn't know them at all. Like this was the first time I'd met a lot of people in person, especially like mosaic artists. Maybe I knew their work or their name, but we hadn't met before and sat down like this in such an intimate way. So it was this great catalyst to like have something to do with your hands. You know, there was a purpose to my visit, and everybody was just so excited to be like talk and have like, for a lot of people, I was their first visitor they've had in like a year or two. And so just that, you know, people were craving conversation and craving unity. Like our country is kind of a mess, as you always know. It just like, you know, just finding something that was unifying and really positive to be a part of. People really got into that. And for a lot of people, they don't have a creative outlet, or they're afraid or intimidated by art. And this project gave them something to do that was cool. And they got to learn something new and yeah, just be a part of something bigger. So it was well received, let's put it that way. Like,
and I think there's so much information now about the value of creating and being in the act of creating, and how
right.
it helps you to process things, and it takes you out of your fight or flight brain and into a different part of your brain, and allows you to sort of relax and the mindful process of that. So I'm just pausing on this slide here, because that's another question logistically, like how do you keep track of everybody? How do you know whose bit is whose bit, and does that even matter?
So it's Stop in this book, which has been an amazing part of this project. It's so special to me because it's got everybody's name, the date that they did the project, where they live, how we know each other, and then their signatures. So to see all these printed, handwritten from little kids and from, I don't know, anyways, it's just such a cool record of and journey of this project. So it's been also a great reference for me, because I just finished photographing each little individual mosaic with the name and date. So I want to do a little coffee table book of it, one of my ideas. But and so I go back, if the tape fell off, or I didn't have their last name, or where are they from, whatever, I could reference back to this book. Well, it was in July, and I don't know. It was been fun having all of this documented so well, like that I could use things as reference, or old video or photographs to see, is that person's piece? But everything has been good in terms of documentation. And then in the final piece, my plan is to I'm going to have it pre-laid out on one table, and literally probably go in and piece it together. But I'm going to have everybody's name. So I want a little map or a key to give to the participants, so that they do know where theirs is, because everybody's excited. Like, oh, I'll know which one's mine. I'm like, not if I do my job well. You won't know which one's yours, where yours starts and where your ends. So yeah, I would like to have a key for them.
And what's the plan for, sort of probably final question for you from me, and then there's some other questions coming in from our participants today, but how's it going to come together? Is it going to be one piece, 3 pieces, 4 pieces? Are you still going? What's the plan?
I'm down to 2 ideas. It still has to do with the whole tapestry idea, with an undulation kind of feel to it. It's going to be one piece, because I thought about the title, Piecing Us Together. This piece has to be together. These pieces need to blend in together. So that's been an important part of it. And I mean, one of my ideas is to have it freestanding versus a wall hanging. And that's where it's getting a little tricky with the weight, and building the right substrate for it. And then with considerations of transporting this to hopefully several locations throughout the United States. so that people can see what they contributed to. So I have a lot of work ahead of me. Yeah, an idea, and it was good. I kind of came back to my original idea of this fabric. I was off the charts for a while there going, oh, I should do a sculpture of, yeah, I don't know. I was, and then I just reined it all right back in. I'm like, get back to it's together.
The intention, yeah. So that's part of it too, that letting the ideas burst out and go wild, and then actually that's not practical. Let's just bring it back down, edit it into something, and keeping true to that original intention of the plan of the project. Yeah. Beautiful, Kate. Thank you so much. Now, we cannot wait to see this come together. And there's a couple of questions that have come in and some other comments.
So we have a question from Ellie for Kate, and Ellie would like to know whether you provided all the materials.
Yeah, so I reached out to my suppliers here in the United States if they would be interested in donating to the project, because I have big ideas for a documentary and it's just going to be a big project, and would they consider kind of sponsoring or donating. So the 3 suppliers here in the States that I use generously donated all the materials, all the tools, the mesh, the adhesive.
So who are they, Kate?
And that is the Mosaico, Bohemian Element, as well as Wits End, which is also smalty.com. And fantastic. Yeah, those 3 have been amazing.
Thank you, Kate. And Diane Sonnenberg, basically, it's more of a comment, and she said that she was one of those people who hadn't met you in person, although she admired your work from afar. And it was really lovely experience to participate in this project. And even her husband asked if he could do a piece. And it was a great fun for both of them. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much fun it was to receive your message saying, hey, can I come over?
Yeah. I was pretty spontaneous with a lot of people. So I am so grateful for people like, sure, why not? And you were in the middle of like craziness and dropped everything and so graciously did this project with me.
So much fun. I'm delighted to see it coming together. It's amazing.
I know. I'm so glad you're part of it.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Saskia. And thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And I'd love to follow this up. Maybe later next year, round 2 collaboration. Let's see how this comes together, because I think that would be wonderful. And our final questions just jumped in from Marion, and Marion's question is, how long was the average work session?
I would say on average about 20 minutes. Some people took a lot longer. Some people jumped right in. But I was impressed. I mean, some people just kind of did it. It just, I would say 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I mean, the actual doing of the mosaic, but we ended up obviously visiting for hours, days, overnight. But yeah, I mean, I kind of allowed like a 3-hour set time frame around the project, so if there was time to chat and stuff, so people were in for.
Beautiful. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Kate. Kerrigan, Oregon, United States, and hopefully we'll see you again in person one day soon.
Yes, I hope so. I want to bring it to Australia.
Please come. We'll join in your project.
Yes.
I did ask you that, but you said that was something that really about the in-person, that was the most important part about it.
So I will come visit you.
Okay, now we are going to be moving on now to our next set of presenters or collaborators, and we have Kate Jenkins and Kristen Wallace, and they're from South Australia, and they have prepared a video presentation for us today. So there are 2 video presentations. The first presentation is on their piece Don't Get Too Comfortable and on their general collaboration, and the second presentation is on their exhibition Bird Talk. So to make it a little easier, they've actually pre-recorded their discussion and PowerPoint, so we'll be able to play that for you. And we will pause after the first video for you to ask any questions or for them to have a chat with you, and then we'll move into the second presentation. Okay.
Hi, we're going to talk about collaboration. I'm Kristen Wallace.
And I'm Kate Jenkins. Just a little bit of background about me. I work as a studio potter and have been doing that for the last 6 years or so. I originally trained at the Tasmanian Art School in visual arts and majored in ceramics. I worked at the Jam Factory here in South Australia, came over here in the early 80s and worked as a studio potter, trainee studio potter in the ceramics studio there. And then after finishing there and after a few years, I started working in community development, first as an arts officer in the arts and then in health. I've also been involved in, after meeting my partner, Peter Hart, who was a woodworker and knife maker, I got very much involved in the environment and hence became chairperson of the Barossa Bush Gardens based in Nuriutpa in the Barossa. And through that, I met up with Kristen. And that's where our collaborations sort of started, really.
Yes. So my name is Kristen Wallace. I grew up and went to university in Germany and studied in Berlin. And then I came to New Zealand, I went to New Zealand, and then I came to Australia. And in the Blue Mountains, I worked in environmental education. And I started mosaics in the Blue Mountains. And around about 2003, self-taught, but I did a lot of courses. I taught people and did workshops, and then I came over here to the Barossa in 2010, and came to this place and wanted to carry on with environmental education, but I also was really interested in mosaics, and so that all came together, and that's where it started.
Don't Get Too Comfortable was the first project that we ever worked on together, and it was an exploration. It was a lovely exploration. I knew nothing about mosaics, but I'd always had a fascination. I was working as a visual artist, mainly painting and doing a bit of textiles, but mainly and I sort of had an interest in mosaics, and I met this Kristen, and she wanted to do some work in the Barossa and work with someone, and so through my role as chairperson at the Bush Gardens, we decided that we'd work on a piece for the actual Bush Gardens for an exhibition, and this was a project.
Yes, and so what happened, and Kate was really thrown into the deep end, but we come to that a bit later. We made a chaise longue, and we started from scratch, as you can see in the top left-hand corner. I had a board from a person who built their house, and that's the base of that chaise longue. And so we designed the seat from scratch with polystyrene, and I had just done a workshop with Sherry Warner Hunter and learned how to cover polystyrene with cement render. And so there is I sort of, from that learning, I turned that into this. And working with Kate was really great, because her skills in design and her training in the arts complemented my sort of technical skills and added to, we complemented each other in that.
And a lot of the birds, we sort of worked with photos and all sorts of things, but mainly did the drawings. I mainly did the drawings, and through that process, Kristen encouraged her to draw and do drawings, and that was a really lovely way of one of the first skills that we shared together about how to place the birds, where to put them, and you can see from the materials, we got materials from everywhere. It was basically raiding Kristen's stash. And we had most of the birds and the animals. We had a lizard on there somewhere too. And we mainly did those creatures in glass. And then the background was all done with tiles, and you can see the sort of flooring tiles, wall tiles, all the different tiles that we could find. Some were really hard to cut, and so for me, who'd never done any mosaics, it was a real baptism of fire, especially when Kristen went to Europe for a few weeks or for a month or so and left me to continue. But it was fun, and I learned an awful lot by doing that. It was a wonderful experience.
And for me, it's really interesting to look at this, and sort of in this first seat in 2011, the andamento of the seat, you will see a whole picture of it. But added into it, these birds, and it's not just the bird sitting there, they all have movement. And that's, I think, one of the fortes with Kate. She can taught me, and we've got birds in movement. And, you know, on the bottom here, you see this magpie flying, and the Rosella sort of taking off. And so there's actually stuff happening in this whole, it's like a big picture, but it's actually a useful piece of furniture. And I think that's something that I've carried right through. Either they move or you can use it, the things I make. So
yeah. And I think just as an experiment with materials, it was a wonderful experience and experiment. And if collaboration is about working with and developing skills and knowledge, this was truly that sort of experience. Yes. Where, you know, sometimes our conversations can be a little bit heated, or we have a lot of laughter, we have heat, we have all of those sorts of things. But it actually, what comes out of it is really a wonderful expression of both of us.
So there comes this is the finished piece.
That's the finished piece, and it's actually a good, I think it would sit about 2.5 people, at least definitely 2 bums on there. So down the front of it, the little drawings are drawings that we played with, and how we could put drawings onto tiles. We used drawings that we then photocopied onto waterproof paper and then sandwiched between glass. And they're all the native flowers, and all the birds are birds from our local area. And then there's also frogs and butterflies and lizards as well there.
And the spider here as
well.
And
a spider, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. And to this day, this chair is now sitting in a private garden, which was the icing on the cake because we sold it. So that's to a very dear friend.
What we discovered, we shared a passion for the environment. We both loved working in community.
So, and we developed these skills and the way of telling stories and expressions in our art form, which is mosaic. We've also worked with other artists, but not on this first piece. That was part of an exhibition though.
And that whole thing of sharing, learning, developing knowledge, it is truly a collaboration, because this seat wouldn't have happened unless the 2 of us had worked together.
I would have never tackled that by myself.
And I wouldn't have, full stop.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kristen and Kate, for that fantastic presentation and talk. Now, what else can you elaborate on for me about this? I've been thinking as I was watching the video, did it evolve, or did you have everything planned?
It evolved, but we, as you can see in some of the pictures, we actually drew the lines of movement and so forth, and where the birds go on the sofa. There was still space for, evolving design, but we had the andamento drawn on because otherwise this thing wouldn't have worked, you know, especially on the seat, which is sort of like a flowing river. But there was huge amounts of discussion, and and as we said in the presentation, that these discussions are sometimes really fierce, but they're always about the project. So yeah.
So a combination of that.
A combination, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was such a large project. I mean, it wasn't just a small piece, and it had to just evolve. I think the area that we started on was very much that back that you saw with the Rosella and working out there, and suddenly you think, oh, it'd be nice to have something there. Okay, a spider, you know. And so it was a lot of that too. So there was a lot of that. Yeah, just working off each other, other's energy, I think. And the bit along the front with it says, don't get too comfortable in tile. And that came afterwards. It was, yeah. And then the back of it, by the time we got to the back of it, we were really quite tired of the thing because it had been going for quite some months. And I had to have I had some tiles that I'd found in a dump on some land, a heritage block of land that I own with other friends. And so we made this very, a much more, not a more realistic, it wasn't realistic, it was a much more abstract piece. And so the back of it, which we haven't got a photo of, which is a shame, is very much an abstract landscape. And so we just let each other's imagination flow, and that was a really good way of collaborating.
Thank you. And a question has come in from Michelina from Canada. She said, I think exposure to mixed media is so important in creative expansion. How did your different mediums affect your creative practice together?
I guess for me, it was just another way of expressing. And I guess one of the things that you'll see, I mean, I've gone very much back into making pots again now and have put mosaics aside. Although what I have done is I've actually, when you're a potter, you always have bits left over, bits of pots that don't work, experiments and all that. And I've actually broken some of those up and I have made mosaics out of just shards. And they've been really effective. So that's really, yeah, and been another expression for me. And I guess that's probably one of the biggest things for me is just looking at my visual art expression in different ways. And that's been a really useful thing.
Can I just add to this? On this chaise longue, as we said in the presentation, we wanted to include those flowers. They're all endangered species in this area. And so we figured out the way of having these paintings on waterproof paper between glass. And so and also the recycling in the way of those found tiles on the back. So it was a sort of exchange with the materials that we had and the ideas we had. So it's sort of, that's the development and the conversation we had about that piece, I think.
It also shows, Kristen, that whole belief that we have in sustainability of practice. And it does lead very nicely into our next exhibition. Next part of our talk, which of course is bird talk.
This next part of our talk on collaboration is about an exhibition that Kristen and I worked on together. And it was a follow-on from what we had discovered through doing the previous project. And it was called Bird Talk. Bird Talk gave us an opportunity to focus on specific issues that have come up for us, drawing attention to the issues around biodiversity, which we were losing in the Barossa. We were losing habitat, food sources for birds and animals and insects, increasing imbalance of the species within the Barossa, only plants as well as birds. And also there was an increase in feral species. Birds were an indicator of the health of the environment. And people love birds. And we've known that through our research, that if you actually focus on one of the issues, not about biodiversity, but on one of the things that affects by the loss of biodiversity, then people get engaged.
And that's where the birds come in. So here we are back in our studio. I am frantically looking for tiles and sorting them, and I think I was ready to chuck them the way the photo looked. But we worked a lot with ceramic tiles in the first project, also with floor tiles and with a lot of glass tesserae. So here we are still working with ceramic tiles.
Also exploring colour through the tiles too.
And the colours were when Johnson & Johnson still had the really good colours and the really easy to cut tiles. Those were the days. Anyway, so so that's what we worked with.
It was also a wonderful opportunity to play with the different birds and to explore the birds too, because this little ottoman that I'm working on are the bee eaters, and I just fell in love with bee eaters. I love the sound, I love what they are, and they're just so colourful. And the Johnson tiles were an opportunity to actually play with that. Yes, hence developing better my skills with cutting and doing other things.
Yeah. So here we are, and again, Kate is experimenting. I think, is that a honey eater as well?
No, yeah, bee eater. Yeah, that's
Bee
another
eater.
bee eater.
Yeah, and I did the feral bird eating the grapes. So
That's
introduced species and a feral bird, still fun on an ottoman. So yeah.
And this was a series of of pieces. I picked up pieces of cut board that we had and just used the shape that was there. And this was a series where I did, I think I did the kingfisher, the blue-winged kookaburra, and the bee eaters. And just for me, it was a real play in finding out more about andamento, and also playing with colour and how you could actually use the colours and work with different colours and tones together. And it was a wonderful way of exploring with colour and design.
So here's a piece that Kate made from glass tiles and tesserae. Classic mosaic elements are in this. And so looking back at this, we actually followed a lot of mosaic rules, which is very nice. So changing andamento and
just playing. For me, it was just about playing, but also learning at the same time. And having Kristen alongside me was very useful, because I learned so much in how to break rules, but not. And it was wonderful. This series was called Night Choristers, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
So here we are again with I think that's
they're the
kingfishers, aren't they?
They're the kingfishers.
It's another ottoman. So another piece which is we built ourselves. The ottomans, there was quite a series of them, and then we tiled them with the birds, and it's another piece of useful furniture too.
And with this project too, we actually also did some workshops and showed other people how to use those. And that's been a lovely collaboration that we have used through Barossa Mosaics, was to actually teach other people how to use, prepare ottomans and how to do the design and drawing for something which is three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional. So we've actually, through the working together, we've discovered lots of things that we can actually share with other people too.
Yeah, there's certainly a workshop and learning and teaching component. And I must say, I probably drawing the birds beforehand, before we put them on the ottomans or something, that was certainly a learning curve for me. And playing with color, working out the colors, and not just saying, well, the orange works with the green, but then realizing why the orange works with the green. So this was a really big project. We went from little ottomans to proper chairs. These are again built from scratch. They have reinforcing inside and are polystyrene and then rendered. And they have these beautiful birds on them.
Crimson rosellas.
And then the back is a bit of a surprise.
And yes. And we both, once again, I did one back, Kristen did the other back. And so we actually had different ways of playing with these wonderful three-dimensional objects. It was a great experiment and a great challenge, but yeah, really good fun.
Then I went to Orsoni in Venice, and apart from being absolutely in Smalty paradise, I learned to use hammer and hardy, to use it with glass. But taking these skills back opened another completely amazing world for us, because we both love the Barossa stone. Anguston is built on a hill which consists of marble and all kinds of colors, and is just amazing. So and the whole area here has stone. Mantina is, what kind of stone is it?
I can't remember now.
Yeah, anyway, so we learned how to cut stone and marble with the hammer and hardy, and some cutters and so forth, and made some birds with stone and marble. So this peregrine falcon, there is a pair in the Barossa, patrols the whole Barossa, and we asked the person who photographed them whether we can use his photographs as a template. And we made this sitting one, and then we made this landing one, which was a great way of sort of integrating the movement and so forth. And I kept that one.
And what we managed with the Mantina slate or stone was it had different colors. So all of that colors you can see through the wing there is from the one stone source, but just picking little bits, picking different pieces. We found a local stonemason who cut stone for us into bars, so we could then use the hammer and hardy. So it was a really good experiment, and we also used a bit of smalty on the feet and through the face and the eye. But yes, it gave us a really using the hammer and hardy and discovering about hammer and hardy gave us such another wealth of experience and skills base. It was it was a challenge, but it was really good fun.
Yes. And we definitely mark the hammer now with smalty and stone on either side.
And those, thank you, Kristen and Kate, those stone birds are just outstanding. I just love the beautiful natural colours of the stone and the beautiful undermento and the movement. And is that something that was new to both of you, that particular method of working with stone and the hammer and hardy in that way?
Well, I've never worked in that at all. You know, I went over to Melbourne, and there's a mosaic artist there who does a lot of hammer and hardy work. His name I cannot remember. Kristen would know. And I bought a hammer and hardy from him, and then came home and put the hardy into a piece of wood that I found, and then took it up to Kristen and said, "This is what we're going to use," and we just got cracking from there on, really. And it's just been really good fun. But I mean, my feeling about creating anything, and I'm a visual artist, I'm not just a mosaic artist, I'm a visual artist, is that you actually, your material inspires what you make. You're you know, and what you see around you. I mean, we love the birds, and we've got a peregrine very close to where we live too. It visits occasionally where I live at Anlaby, which is north of the Barossa. And yeah, just to watch those birds fly, and then to be saying, yes, I love those birds. I can see them, and the wings, the under parts of the wings are just exquisite. And the stone was a perfect vehicle for doing that, to get the movement of the wing and the shape and the form. And mosaic's quite good because you can get that really three-dimensional, especially working with something like stone or smalty. You get that lovely three-dimensional quality. You can see the progression that we made. This sitting peregrine is our first one, and we were still struggling and playing a little bit. And then you get the flying one, or the one that's just coming into land, and you can see how within, you know, between, and there was one bird in the middle, between the 2-3 birds, we managed to get so much more into the work that we were doing, and just loved it. And so that to me is, it's all new, but it's all fun.
Thank you, Kate. And you enjoyed working that method, Kristen?
I did definitely, yes, but it was a new discovery to us. Yeah, Kate went to Fabian at the Mosaic Republic.
Thank you.
He sold the Hammer and Hardy to us, and yeah, I've been using it ever since. Yeah, and it just that's the whole collaboration we did. It's also, and I think that's what our talk shows, is the exploration of material and the expansion of the materials we use. And so now in my work, I use the whole breadth of it, and I'm sort of also going back to basics in some ways. So yes, definitely enjoyed that, but it also, yeah, widened our experience. And using local materials, which is also part of our environmental consciousness. You know, we have all these colors and all these different marbles and granites in the Barossa. So yeah.
What we've managed to do, Caitlin, is to make having a really good connection with some of our local people who are producing stuff, who are the stones, both. I think by all the projects that we've worked on, the stone, the quarries and those, they've actually donated the stones to us. Not that we're using lots, but they've donated to it, and then they get advertised or promoted through what we do. And so there's sort of it's all of that collaboration across, and I think that's really good.
And your collaboration has gone further than this. And I think next time, I was speaking to Kristen through the week, and we're going to theme a couple of other presentations in the future about interdisciplinary practice and interdisciplinary collaboration, and also another topic for discussion on social mosaic and the role of that. So really sincere thanks. And is there anything you want to finish with, Kristen and Kate?
I would like to say, yes, this has also been a technical learning experience because of putting this PowerPoint into Zoom. That was fun, and I was actually quite concerned about it, but then we worked it out together. And the last presentation is a result of that, because we got very comfortable, and the presentation turned out to be 15 minutes. So fair enough, and this is enough of us now. Thank you for that opportunity.
You are most welcome. You are most welcome. Okay, so we are moving on now to hear from Marion Shapiro and myself in our final presentation for today, which is about our most recent and continuing collaboration in progress, which is our series titled Safety Net. Just to give an introduction to this, this series of work is part of a greater collaboration, which is our joint exhibition. So Marion and I are working towards a joint exhibition at the Hawkesbury Regional Gallery, which is in Windsor, New South Wales. And this exhibition, which will be loosely titled Escape Artists, we're still finalising, tweaking the title, is going to be in April 2023. Now, that's getting close. We started this process a couple of years ago, and it felt like forever because it was continually delayed and rescheduled. But now we're just over a year away. So this is we're both working along similar but different complementary themes. And then we decided that as part of that, we would really like to create one of those works as a specific collaboration. So we started to work on the ideas around that, and we got together in the studio and we thought, how can we develop something that speaks to the broader theme of the exhibition, that brings in both of our particular concepts, and it allows us to extend and expand on our previous collaboration of Australia. So Marion, how did our pods get started?
Right, well, I think part of it was the kind of, the time difference between when we actually proposed this and when the exhibition was scheduled, which was 3 years. And obviously the last couple of years, things have changed a lot. And we very much wanted at least one aspect of the exhibition to look at what was happening now rather than, what we were necessarily concerned with 3 years ago when we started all this 2 years ago. So what we really wanted to examine was kind of certain aspects of lockdown, particularly, and that kind of conflicting feeling of being sort of simultaneously safe and protected, but also, how much of that is a constraint and a trap. And that whole thing about, we've all been forced with various lockdowns to turn inwards and to find new ways of kind of being alone and being together when you can't kind of physically be together. So that was kind of the area of exploration. In practical terms, we decided that we would do 6 of these, and at a point where we could actually be in the same room together, we sat down and did some very rough sketches of what those kind of pod shapes would look like. And then we started to make them. And then, of course, obviously, what we ended up making was kind of different from what we started drawing, because it evolved. And we've also ended up with 9 of them, although at least several people have suggested we should make more. And somebody who shall be nameless suggested we made 40, which is not really practicable
No.
at this time.
No, not at all. And they're all different in that they're all slightly different sizes, and they all have different levels of opening and closing to them. So some of them are very, very closed and sort of with slight perforations or slight openings, and some of them are very open. And it also plays to that idea around our relationship with the outside world. So in some ways, the internal mosaic pods are a little bit personified. And that the net that surrounds them is also a metaphor for the home in a way, that or the confinement, and with different aspects or levels of opening and closing, damage, perfection. And we're also trying to make reference to the relationship people have then with confinement, and also then to the outside world. And I do think in some ways, for some people, lockdown has really changed their relationship with the outside world. And as Marion was saying earlier, the relationship, the different ways that we've each been required to adapt, or the adaptation that we've all undertaken in terms of our social roles and our work roles through this process. But another really key component in the series is the copper knitting, which is really Marion. Marion has done all the copper knitting, and it's been taken to a whole new level in this series, Marion. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, I knew that we wanted to incorporate it, and I went on a copper knitting class about 3 years ago now, with the aim of incorporating it into my own practice. And I had been, but on much kind of flatter surfaces. So not flat, because people who know me know I barely ever work flat, but flattish, I guess. And this was a big leap into the kind of 3-dimensional aspect of it. So some of the knitting is actually wrapping around the pod, some of it is kind of loose over the pod, some of it is actually kind of springing off the pod shape. And I did offer to teach Caitlin how to do this, but she refused my kind offer. So it kind of, the starting point left was me to actually physically do it. But whenever we were incorporating it, we always talked about it beforehand and how we envisaged it. Although that did actually change from time to time. I mean, this little one that we're seeing at the moment, which is really quite small, started off being encased by this bigger pod, and then we didn't like it, so we took it out and put knitting around it. And then we thought that was kind of too small. It's really small, that one. It's kind of yay big. And so we gave it a kind of bigger overcoat to make it take up more space on the wall. So it was a very kind of evolutionary process. And also, it wasn't just me doing it in terms of, Caitlin was obviously involved in the planning and deciding what I would make. But also, once I'd made it, Caitlin then kind of charged in, and she distressed it, and we cut you know, we cut more holes in things, and although I deliberately put holes in some of them. And Caitlin was patination person in chief as well, which was great fun.
Yeah, so that first one we looked at, this is it now, because we ended up, it's a bit cropped. We didn't like it on its first little pod. So this is it cut open, and then it's now on a new one, which is this one, which is starting to come together. And you can see the shim that we've got in there too, that we're trying to incorporate elements of the metal within the pod as well as around the pod. And we had some, we did put some parameters on it. Again, collaboration, there always needs to be some parameters. Otherwise, where do you stop? Where do you start? So we with Australia, as you've just seen earlier, we had the parameters of the actual outline of the shape, which was, you know, not something that you could really change. Whereas with this, there are no parameters. So how do we, you know, try to create something that is, that works, that's diverse, that speaks to both of our skills and concepts? So one of the things we did do was we limited our colour palette. So you'll notice that most of the pieces have the copper knitting as well as mainly blues and metallics and natural stone and black. So this was there are some pieces that have had elements of other colours popped into them, but in general, we've sticked to that limited colour palette. And one thing that is very interesting is how the colour or the feeling of the pod changes after patination. So this is probably our favourite one. We agree this is our favourite one. I have kind of love-hate relationships with them. Like one of them at the moment I absolutely hate. I have to talk to you about that, Marion. I can't start. I've decided I don't like it at all. And this one I think we both love. So it's interesting how we each have positive and negative relationships with different forms, and then there's that negotiation process that we have around what we include and what we exclude. The other thing to point out is not everything that we've made is actually included, which is another really important point when you're working with a body of work. Just because you've made it doesn't mean it's good and doesn't mean it should go in. And just because we both made it and we're experienced doesn't mean it's good. So we can, you know, go backwards and forwards about what might be included and what might not be. But this is our favourite. I think we agree. Do you agree?
Can I just interject very quickly to kind of emphasise what you're saying, that this whole collaboration process, particularly with this piece, I think, this little body of work, it's not a straight line. It's not like you start at the beginning and you end up at the end. You kind of go a bit and then you double back and then you take a bit out, you rub a bit out of the line, if you like, and then you kind of carry on, and then you see what it looks like at the end and you jiggle it again. It's a very evolving process.
Absolutely. And then the work changes too. So this is the fresh copper, and you can see that the colours on this pod are particularly bright, and we can see inside the pod here, and we're trying to get this internal external thing going on as well. So I might make a substrate, then Marion might make mosaic inside it, then I would take it and mosaic the outside of it, which is what happened here. And then I would take it back and then I would patinate it. So my patination, I'm really just using a vinegar, evaporated vinegar as my patination method. So my kitchen and my studio have smelt rather like salt and vinegar chips for quite some time. My boyfriend was very confused when he came over and saw pots all around the kitchen. He said, "What are you cooking?" He went up and took the lid out, and there was a mosaic in there, and he was basically knocked out by vinegar. So this is what's been happening in the studio and at home, because the vinegar is at the bottom and the gases are evaporating. It's evaporating up into the air, and then the patination occurs on the copper. And it isn't necessarily a permanent thing, so it's constantly changing as it interacts with the air. So they've been swapping backwards and forwards, lots of photographs and videos of the process. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? What about this? What about that? As we exchange our piece. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Marion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of particularly interesting in terms of how different this collaboration was to Australia. Because on Australia, although we were working on one piece, we each had our defined areas, which were defined by the contour lines. So, you know, I did one bit, Caitlin did the next bit, I did the next bit, and so on. And with this, it's been a much kind of closer collaboration, if you like. And I think it's resulted in a synergy in a way that Australia didn't. Like, Australia was one thing we made together, but because, you know, as Caitlin said, one of us would start the substrate, the other would start the mosaic, then it would go back. I would put the knitting at some point. The other person would then complete it. So you were actually working on a surface with somebody else's existing mosaic, and you had to make it both tie in, but also not lose your kind of individual voice. And what's been really interesting for me is how much I think this has really become more than the sum of its parts. And there are some where, like that one, I know who did what, who did which on it, because basically Caitlin did the front and I did the back. But there are others where one person has started and the others finished, where I look at it and I go, oh, I'm not actually sure which of our hands is where, which I think has made it, you know, really, really interesting. And I know one kind of probably shouldn't say this about one's own work, but I look at these, and every time I look at them, somebody once said to me that when they looked at my work, it made their stomach hurt, which she meant in a really good way. And this is that feeling that I get from looking at this series. I just get this kind of visceral kind of whoa at it. Partly, I think, because of the collaboration between the media. So the way that the knitting has been used, which I think, you know, lots of people have used wire and copper and other stuff. We're not, you know, originators in this, but I think we're the only people doing it like this. And I just find it incredibly exciting. Say it or shouldn't.
That's wonderful. I might just maybe ask this question on behalf of Michalina, because it relates directly to what you, Marian, and Caitlin were just saying. And she's basically asking, did your previous collaboration make this project go easier? Do you think collaborating repeatedly with the same person is beneficial? Or do you think you will look to engage with others in the future too?
Ooh. Caitlin, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that Australia was a catalyst for our collaborative process. And this is a development of it. So we've both discussed continuing the series, whether we make more. I think I have a few things I need to do before that, like make the rest of the work for the exhibition, which is coming up very quickly. But then I'd be very open to that. And I think we are getting to know each other's working methods and patterns, and it's starting, you know, it has worked really well. I mean, we really haven't had any issues at all, have we, Marion, with this? No. Yeah, great question though. Excellent question.
And I think, I mean, we've both worked a lot with other people before. I mean, we both teach. We've both done community projects. We've both done big projects for commissions where we're leading teams. And I think all kind of that experience helps.
Kristen has made a note about the shadows, and I really agree. So when we install the work, we're going to need to sort of consider that in the lighting.
Absolutely.
And how the shadows activate the form. So we've done a bit of a draft hang in my studio. It looks a bit clumsy, but it's to get the idea of how the pieces might work with shadow as well, and the play on light, which is a critical thing that we all understand and love in mosaic, is that the way the light plays on the form, and these things are kinetic, so they move in the ambient air. So as they move, again, the light changes and the shadows change. So there's a lot of things going on in that we need to work out in terms of how it's going to be installed. Well, I think I'll formally say thank you to Marion. Thank you so much to Marion for that. And also thank you to our other presenters. Thank you to Kate Kerrigan and Kate Jenkins and Kristen Wallace for joining us today. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I wish you all the very best for your weekend, for your Saturday night if you're in America or Canada, Europe, and your Sunday afternoon if you're in Australia. and enjoy your time, and I will see you all in person or online very soon. Thank you.